Hello folks, I'm Seven Song in front of the camera, and this is Abbe Findley behind the camera, and we've just driven many miles. We're in the southwest of the United States, and we're in an uncommon stand of a plant that both of us consider a strong medicine, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about it. So the plant that I'm standing amidst or amongst is Chaparro Amargosa, and that is the common name of the plant. Chaparro Amargosa. Amar means bitter, and I'm not sure what chaparro means, but it is quite a bitter plant. So again, the common name is Chaparro Amargosa. It's also sometimes called crucifixion thorn. But before you get excited and think that you live around a lot of crucifixion thorn, that's a common name for thorny plants. Whereas Chaparro Amargosa tends to just be this. So all that again, this plant has two common names. Chaparro Amargosa, probably that's the one that herbalists use the most. And then also it's called crucifixion thorn, like a number of other plants that grow in the American Southwest. And the scientific name is Castela, and that's named after somebody. Actually, I'm not sure what Castela means. Now that I think about it, it's certainly not, I doubt it's Abbe and Costello, because then they would have had two L's in it. And the species is emoryi, and that's named after somebody named Emory. So this is Castela emoryi. The family is a plant family that's not very common at all in the United States, especially native plants, and that's the Simaroubaceae. Like the lion, Simaroubaceae. I'm not sure what the common name of the family is. So all of that together. Crucifixion thorn, Chaparro Amargosa, common names. Scientific name, Castela emoryi. Family, Simaroubaceae. And what's interesting about the Simaroubaceae, it has just a few members that I know, but for instance, one of them is quassia. And so quassia, which grows in Central America, is also a very famous bitter. And it has a history of use for malaria. I haven't used it that way, but it has a very rich history of use, the quassia, for that. And the other plant that's now it's well established in the United States, that's in this family, is a plant that's sometimes called tree of heaven, and that's Ailanthus altissima. And the reason it's called tree of heaven is because it grows in, was one reason, is it grows in cracks, it grows easily and grows quickly, so it makes a lot of shade. So the Simaroubaceae has some very interesting plants, Castela emoryi, quassia, as well as tree of heaven. And for many of us, we often wonder, could tree of heaven, which is a very common, very weedy tree in many parts of the United States, be used as a substitute for this very uncommon plant, which grows in a very limited region? So these plants are dioecious. Dioecious means that the plants have separate male or staminate and female pistillate flowers on different plants. So again, a dioecious plant, the flowers are unisexual. So the flowers are either male, called staminate because they have stamen and make pollen, or a pistillate. Pistillates have ovaries and produce the fruits. And so this one to the right of me is a very clear pistillate, Chaparro Amargosa, and it's easy to see because here are the seeds. So I don't know this plant well enough to know that if there's some around me here that don't have seeds, and I'm not sure if they're the staminate plant or not. But when I'm looking for this plant, because it does look like other plants from a distance, when I'm looking for a positive ID, because I've never seen it in flower, I look for these very distinctive seed pods to it, these five-parted, and Abbe later will have some close-ups of the seed pods for you to tell. The plant is glaucous, and so glaucous means with a waxy covering, and often waxy coverings give the plants a blue-green sheen, And these plants have that blue-green sheen, as many waxy plants do. And again, Abbe will be showing close-ups of these. Both of the plants to my right and my left are pistillate, sometimes called female plants. So all that's the beginning. And then, so why do we have an interest here? Well, one of the reasons is Michael Moore, a very important teacher of mine in the 90s, and other times as well. Michael Moore really loved this plant, and he liked it as an anti-parasitical. So I want to explain what that word means. And I'm going to be distracted because there's a butterfly flying right in front of us. It's not common. This is the hot desert, so it's before 8 a.m. It's easily 80 degrees right now. So, so the word parasite is not a very useful medical term, because medical people use the word parasite to mean one thing, and then people who are sick with many different things use the word parasite to be a very ambiguous term or a very all-encompassing term. So basically, we could divide things that invade human beings into things like bacteria, viruses, fungi, worms, and protozoas. In general, this plant tends to be used mostly for bacteria, so bacterial infections, and also for protozoal infections, so as opposed to viral infections. So common viruses include stomach viruses, GI viruses, and then respiratory viruses like colds and flus. And this plant doesn't tend to be used for that at all. But it tends to be used commonly for if, let's say, you travel someplace new and you eat the food and there's a bacteria that your body's not used to, and you get a lot of vomiting and diarrhea. So that's a classic use of this plant. So again, in this case, I'm separating viruses, bacteria, and protozoa. So not for viral infections, but bacterial infections. Though I tend to use it more for, in fact, I've only used it for internal bacterial infections. So I haven't used it for things like staphylococcus infection or streptococcus infection. I'm using it more when somebody eats a food. I'm not sure what bacteria they're infected with, but they have quick onset of symptoms, and it looks like a bacterial infection. Quick onset of symptoms, sometimes a fever, often a lot of diarrhea. Often will pass in a couple of days, and then the person just feels weak. But this will help kill the bacteria. So again, so the main use of this plant, number one, is to kill bacteria, and I consider the bacteria that mostly are in your GI tract. And then number two is I use it as an anti-protozoal. So there's quite a few protozoas, but two of the more common ones that people know are Giardia, and I'm going to give the scientific name and then give the common name, Entamoeba Histolytica. But Entamoeba Histolytica is an amoeba, and it's the thing that causes amoebic dysentery, another very wide-ranging problem, often in food or water. So we have this plant's use for bacterial infections, and we have this plant's use as a anti-protozoal, again, amoebas, and the protozoa called Giardiasis. I want to say, for some reason, in the circles I travel with, people often say they have Giardia when they just have diarrhea, maybe bad burps, and sometimes they do, but often they don't. So it's good to know, this not for this presentation, but it's often good to know the onset of symptoms. For instance, Giardia is a minimum of 3 days, but more likely it takes about 7 days before the symptoms really show themselves. So if you ate something and got sick the next day, or drank something and got sick the next day, or even 2 days later, very uncommon to be Giardia. More likely to be bacteria or potentially a virus. Or you can actually just have a food intolerance. Many things can happen. The parts of the plant used, so it's a plant that I use sparingly because it's uncommon. So there's only a few places where I feel I can gather it, and often I go by myself, and I go about every 10 years and gather enough to just get me by. I don't sell the plant. I do use it sometimes in the free clinic and other clinics I work in. And so to make the medicine, it's the whole thing, basically. Stems, thorns, and these are very sharp and very non-flexible thorns. It is pretty hard to gather this plant and not cut yourself a bunch. So what you do is you would find some stems that are nice and glaucous. As you see more plants, you'll see that many of them, they're dying. Stems die constantly on these plants. So I would look for nice living plant stems, and I would cut them. You can see me poking myself already. And then I would just trim them down into small pieces. You don't have to, I mean, it's very easy to dry this plant. It basically almost never has that much water in it. So if you gather it and you can't chop it for a few days, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to stay dry. It doesn't rot very fast like a very wet plant might do. So I've never used the seeds, and I probably wouldn't. I would leave the seeds hoping that the plant slowly spreads itself. It just does not spread itself that easily, even in places where it's common, where we are now. So I would chop it into smallish pieces. You know, I'd break it down, make it smaller, and then I dry it, and then I usually tincture it. And at this point, it's the only form of medicine I've used is tea and tincture. To make a tea, you have to simmer it for about 10 or 15 minutes, the dried plant, and it's very bitter. It's very amargosa. It's very bitter. And then tincture it, and so I tincture it at about 1 to 3, 1 to 4, probably closer to 1 to 4, at about 50% ethanol, 50% alcohol, drinking alcohol. The reason I have some doubt about it, I haven't made it in a number of years, and I constantly shift. But I could say that all again. My favorite way to tincture this is really close to 1 to 4, and those numbers show up other places in Abbe's video, and 50% ethanol, 50% water, what's commonly called 100 proof. And I just soak it in there for a couple of, probably a minimum of 2 weeks, but more likely closer to a month. So I take a jar, I measure the plant, I put in the alcohol, I shake it for a couple of days in a row, or somebody else shakes it for me, and then you have a very bitter tincture. And I think that if you're the kind of person that when you travel to new places and you seem to get diarrhea easily, I would say this might be something to pack. Now, every time one talks about taking a traveling medicine kit, there's always a question of how are you traveling? Because if you're traveling by plane or you're traveling by buses, you can only take so much medicine. But I would say if you're going to take it, like probably bring a 4-ounce bottle. If you're the person listening to this and think, every time I go to wherever, I get diarrhea, like 1 or 2 ounces might not be enough. But you would probably want to do something so you go someplace new, and all of a sudden you might shart. So shart is the technical word for a wet fart, and you can figure out what the sh is in wet fart. So it's that condition where you're scared to have flatulence, you're scared to fart because you're worried that it might be a little moister than you want. So so you have that, so you're like, uh-oh, wet fart coming on. And so what you do is you want to try to kill anything that might be causing it. Again, it could be food intolerance or something else where this won't help at all. But what you would do is you would probably take about 2 milliliters, a full dropper full, and then try to take like about 2 milliliters about every 4 hours. So a good higher dose. You could take more as well. There's probably, if you took lots and lots of it, maybe there's toxicity. But the thing about Chaparro, and this goes on with what I was just talking about dosaging, is you probably don't take it for more than 7 days at a time. So you're traveling and you have diarrhea and you want to kill the bacteria protozoa causing the diarrhea. You take something about 2, maybe 3 or 4 milliliters a few times a day. But if you still had the diarrhea, Giardia is a different question, by the way. But if you still had the diarrhea while traveling, 4 or 5 days later, I would just stop taking it. It's probably not going to help. Also, you just have to realize that it's very bitter, and for some people, it might upset their stomach, and so then that will also limit its use. So what I'm saying is, generally, when you take it, you take like often if you have a bottle and it has a cap, often the cap is about 3 milliliters per cap, a dropper and a half full. And then you do shots of that, like a cap full every few hours, and it's a good way to do it, or even more if you're hardier and need stronger medicine. So that pretty much winds it up. That's the main use for this plant, as an antibacterial for GI bacteria that are causing a problem, anti-protozoa for things like Giardia, which will show up a week after you travel or 2 weeks after you travel, taking good amounts of it, taking it regularly, and just enjoying this plant that is so well protected. I mean, it's almost more well protected than a cacti It just has so many of these beautiful thorns. And I just want to say a thing about wildcrafting here is I do occasionally gather it, but only like, this is never a plant to gather for anything but personal use, or as I said, sometimes in the clinic I work in. This plant could easily be over harvested. So there's always a trick, like, do I even do a video like this? But I do enjoy this plant. If you go to other places in other countries, sometimes there's enough of it to gather. For right now, we're just going to enjoy its beauty. And here it is, beautiful Chaparro Amargosa. Thank you, Abbe.